It's hard to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu is not seeking a war in the Middle East. It's very difficult to believe that he is unable or unwilling otherwise to stop the murderous rampages of both the settler communities in the occupied territories and those of his own forces. Undercover Israeli operatives, looking as much like the locals as they could, were rampaging through the camp and the town of Jenin just in the last 48 hours and shooting anyone that moved, including in the back, and murdering them in cold blood. But the conduct of the settlers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan is of course a deliberate provocation, and not just to the Muslims in Palestine, and not just to the Christians in Palestine either, whose patriarch said that the attacks on the Al-Aqsa Mosque by Israeli settlers and forces were exactly synonymous, tantamount to attacks on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre here in this Easter week. The rampages were deliberately planned. The Israeli soldiers who piled into the mosque to defend the illegal settlers rampaging through it, tramping on prayer mats, and who knows what else profanity, were there to be protected by the Israeli soldiers who came tooled for the occasion night after night after night. Smoke bombs, gas bombs, rubber bullets, and then finally real live ammunition. This is a stepping up of settler and soldier violence against the Palestinian people, which can only have the effect, and I argue only have the intended effect, of forcing the Arab countries around Israel, now reunited with Iran in the historic peace deal from Beijing, now to step up their solidarity with the Palestinian people under such murderous occupation, and indeed to go beyond the levels of solidarity they have offered before. It's not that the Arabs are any longer unable to do it. You could hit Tel Aviv with a missile from Yemen, from Iraq, from Lebanon, from Syria, and that's without any of the collaborating countries, Egypt or Jordan, even joining in. And the missile technology that exists now in those countries numbers these missiles in the hundreds of thousands. No Iron Dome could possibly protect against them. Every town, city, and village in occupied Palestine would be within range of the rockets from all of those places I have mentioned, let alone from the Islamic Republic of Iran, whose firepower is of an altogether different order. The CIA said today that within a week, Iran will have enough uranium to actually create a nuclear weapon, though they continue to say they have no intention of making one. In other words, the shaping up of the various forces is extremely alarming to those of us who do not want to see another general war in the Middle East. But it may also explain why Netanyahu said today that Israel will not be supplying Kiev with weapons, and he added, "This matter is now closed," bringing to an end a ping-pong match of speculation as to whether the United States would manage to strong-arm Israel into releasing some of its formidable armory to the Ukrainian armed forces, who are fast running out of ammunition, which cannot be supplied by the NATO allies. The German chief of military staff said yesterday that Germany could no longer meet its commitments to NATO because its armory was so depleted, supplying the proxy war in Ukraine. So if the Americans can't arm them and the Europeans won't arm them any further, they're casting us a further net aside to try and fill the gaps. But Lula in Brazil, which possesses a huge stockpile of weaponry, has ruled out supplying weapons to Kiev and stated that Brazil was in the business of making peace, not fanning the flames of war. And so the tide is turning. Bakhmut has been liberated, virtually all of it, 88% of it, the last time I looked at the war map some hours ago, admittedly, and all of the centre, all of the administrative and governmental buildings, all of the vital infrastructure of Bakhmut, not that there is much of that left standing, is in the hands of the Russian forces, leaving open a wide swathe of eastern and southern Ukraine for further Russian advance. Of course, we're expecting any minute now the spring offensive by Zelensky's forces, aren't we? Well, no. According to leaked documents, leaked by whom we'll explore with former CIA and Pentagon official Larry Johnson later in the show, we can learn from those leaked documents that the United States is, amongst other things, spying on all of its friends. Nothing much changes there. Even Mrs. Merkel's personal handy phone in her handbag was being routinely listened to, not by Joe Biden or by Donald Trump, but by the saintly Barack Obama. So if Mrs. Merkel was being bugged by the United States, it's no surprise that the South Korean leadership, the Israeli leadership, leaders across the alliance are being routinely spied upon by their best friend, their big brother, the United States of America. But we learned many other things from those leaked documents, amongst them that the spring offensive will now likely be a summer offensive and may even slip into the autumn, just before the snows fall again. It's because the United States has made clear in those documents that only very limited advance and recapture of territories is even remotely possible by any new spring, summer, or autumn counter-offensive by Ukraine. As Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor and many other seers of the military field have made repeatedly clear, the Ukrainian army is a busted flush and its allies no longer able to put lead in its pencil. And therefore, the case for a negotiated end to the conflict becomes surely overwhelming. Unless, of course, you don't care a damn about Ukrainians. We know that the West didn't care a damn about the Ukrainians in the east of the country for 8 long years before Russia announced its special military operation. Didn't matter how many thousands of those were killed, they were the wrong type of Ukrainians. But it doesn't matter to the NATO alliance whether Western Ukrainians get killed in large numbers either. That's obviously true, because the same leaked documents make clear that the military losses in Bakhmut, defending a territory they tried to claim was militarily insignificant, were, as described by the Pentagon itself, in quotation marks, catastrophic. Catastrophic losses of Western Ukrainian life, all for what? As more and more Ukrainian soldiers are themselves asking on video, freely available on the internet if you're interested. You'll not see it, of course, on the mainstream media, which continues to be staffed overwhelmingly by practiced liars. As Elon Musk revealed devastatingly in an interview with the BBC, which had not been scheduled, the BBC reporter turned up unannounced without an appointment at the Twitter headquarters in San Francisco and stuck microphones in people's faces. Musk, learning of it, invited the BBC reporter, if I can call him a reporter, for a sit down. But he made it a space on Twitter. Ask me what that means, but it means that everybody on Twitter could watch it happening in real time. It meant, of course, that the BBC could not edit out the most embarrassing parts of what can only be described as a match between Mike Tyson and Joe Bugner. It was not a mismatch, it was a no contest. It was a pummeling from Musk of the BBC, which made a mockery of those of us who are forced on pain of imprisonment to pay the BBC a license fee, which is not to be confused with government funding, you understand. It's just that the government will put you in prison if you don't pay it. Even Stalin didn't think of that one. And the BBC have the gall to say that they object to being called state-funded, when only a Jesuitical exercise in sophistry could confuse the license fee with government funding. It is entirely the same thing, a distinction without a difference. And the BBC, which was extremely happy to see people like me falsely labelled by the old Twitter and not removed by the new Twitter as Russian state-affiliated media, when I am not now, nor have I ever been, Russian state-affiliated media. But the BBC and NPR in the United States of America have now, at least in part, been labelled for what they are, which is mouthpieces of their respective states. NPR has announced that it's quitting Twitter. A nation mourns. The world mourns. How are we going to survive without the 50 NPR Twitter accounts any longer? I am myself bereft, aren't you? But they themselves on their website, which they've now taken down, stated that federal funding was crucial to the very existence of National Public Radio, NPR. These hypocrites that like to go around calling other people mouthpieces of this government or that, when they are called out as the mouthpieces they are. I'm not Russian state-affiliated media, but the BBC is British state-affiliated media. NPR is American state-affiliated media. At least Musk has the benefit of truth in regard to both of them. But anyway, the BBC hapless hack, who will never show his face in public again, surely, accused Musk of presiding over an explosion in hate speech on Twitter since he took over. Musk did the very intelligent thing of asking him to give a single example. I can't give you an example, said the BBC hack, but my people tell me it is so. Give me one example, asked Musk, and the BBC reporter squirmed. As we all did when we saw the two videos released this week of Joe Biden and the Dalai Lama. Joe Biden is a danger to children, as overwhelmingly you all agree in the poll that we are currently running. If Joe Biden put his hands on my daughters like that, I would punch him out, wouldn't you? Who would allow their child to be manhandled by this sleazy old man who may or may not have the benefit of an insanity defense, but any other person behaving like, look where his hand is, look on that girl's breasts, any other person behaving like that on camera would be forced to resign. But this sleazy old man continues, look at him, continues to fondle and stroke and sniff and feel and grope young children anytime they are brought before him. And the children look mighty frightened, if you ask me. The Dalai Lama, Dulala Dalai Lama, is, of course, an even more obscene example. He was filmed this week, not just kissing a little boy, but French kissing a little boy on camera, and asking the little boy into a microphone if he would like to lick his tongue. If any other religious leader in the entire world were to have done that on camera, he would be forced out of office by the end of that working day. Why was the Dalai Lama not? Doolally is a CIA employee. That's why. The Dalai Lama, though he has hoodwinked various perfectly coiffed, tailored and pompadoured Hollywood stars, and the women are just as bad, over the decades, is in fact, as Rupert Murdoch called him, a mad old monk shuffling around in Gucci shoes. But if you're an American taxpayer, it's you who's paying for the Gucci shoes. Why is the American taxpayer shelling out tens of millions of dollars to this old fraud, this pervert? I'll tell you why. Because the Dalai Lama is a useful knife with which to stick into the side of China. That's his only attraction. You think the powers that be in the Pentagon, in the State Department, in the White House, in the Congress give a toss about Buddhism? You really think that? They're supporting the Dalai Lama because he's a useful idiot, a useful pervert that they can use against China, along with all the other pieces in the hellish orchestra they deploy in permanency, permanent residence, to weaken, divide, discredit, blacken the name of China. Well, you pay them if you want to, but you're a fool if you do. There's much more of this coming up over the next 1 hour and 40 minutes, because this is the mother of all talk shows.